following is a project of our nonprofit newsroom. Support Midcoast Morning and local community-centered journalism today by signing up to be a monthly sustaining donor at chly.ca/donate. It doesn't take much money to support local news.
Hello and welcome to Midcoast Morning. I'm Joe Pugh. Nanaimo City Council is split between two different plans to upgrade its public works yard. The issue, which was the subject of two recent cancelled AAPs, returned to the agenda this week at a Governance and Priorities Committee meeting. The public works yard on Labie Road is where the city services its vehicles, like plows and fire trucks. It's also home to an administration building where city staff work. The facility was built in the 1960s and upgrades have been in the works for years. A plan to build a new fleet maintenance facility on the site to service city vehicles has been delayed because of two cancelled alternative approval processes, or AAPs. An AAP is required to get elector permission for the city to borrow money to fund the project. We've covered the cancelled AAPs on a recent show. You can find it on our podcast feed or our website, chly.ca/midcoastmorning, for more on that. At this week's meeting, staff presented council with different options for the future of the project, and councillors were divided between two of them. The first, Option 1, is essentially the same plan as before, to borrow up to $48 million to build the fleet maintenance facility and a few smaller upgrades. Mayor Leonard Krog and councillors Ian Thorpe and Janice Perino were in favor of this option. The other one to gain some traction was called Option 3 at the meeting. It imagines a bigger project. It would still build the fleet maintenance facility, and it would replace the administration building at the same time. The option would require up to $90 million of borrowing for the project to be completed. Here's Paul Rosen, Director of Engineering with the City of Nanaimo, explaining this option to councillors at the meeting.
So Option 3 is probably the most different one that we have put together for council. It involves the fleet maintenance building and administration building, as well as the stormwater management that's required as part of the project. The big difference here is the fleet maintenance building and the administration building would be sort of merged together spatially and placed at the north end of the yard. And the reason we were able to do this is because we've made some trade-offs with this option. So one of the reasons the fleet maintenance building was placed at the south end of the yard was really two primary reasons. One of them was noise. So having very noisy activities away from like offices and crew space that requires a bit more quiet. So that's one of the reasons. The other reason, probably the most important one, is separating out the heavy fleet movements from pedestrian and light vehicle movements. And so that one, with this option, this third option, those would be a little bit closer together because the buildings would be kind of side by side each other. But placing them spatially close to each other in a sort of separated away from the yard, you can do it all as one project. So it'd be a pretty big project. We're anticipating the borrowing required for that would be about $90 million. But it does provide some certainty. It provides less overall long-term cost because there'd be less exposure to inflation, or escalation as we call it, as well as less borrowing costs.
During the meeting, Councillor Ben Gesselbrecht spoke in favor of that option, saying that he's heard people have left jobs with the city because of the working conditions at the current administration building.
I definitely think that Option 3 is something that we should entertain more seriously on a number of fronts. One, in terms of need, I'm not sure when Phase 2 is going to happen for the administration building, probably 2 years from now once it's done. And so it's going to be right on the back of whatever else we're borrowing, dragged out. I know that the need for administrative space is now. It was actually 10 years ago. I know of several municipal employees, ex-municipal employees that worked out of that, and they left for a large reason because they just didn't want to come to work in a stuffy cubicle in a portable, modular building for the amount of responsibility that they had. I think throughout this whole process, and I do think that our communications is going to be better and more dialed in, but there was a lot of confusion over phase 1, phase 4, $160 million build out of the public, the Nanaimo Operations Center. And I think this option 3 gives us an opportunity to get it all done in one shot. The rest of the phases are smaller internal, that can do with much smaller borrowing, short-term borrowing, done. We can go out and get the public works yard done with option 3, which are the 2 main big builds that need to get done.
Councillor Janice Perino said she wished option 3 had been presented when council first began looking at upgrades to the public works yard, but that she'd be concerned about changing the plan at this stage.
The problem that I have with this whole discussion is that I wish we'd seen option 3 a year ago, because it does make sense, the one and done idea, it does make sense. So I really appreciated that you brought it today to us, because it's important to look at everything, and you brought it forward, so that's helpful. My concern is, I think, as Mayor Krog and Councillor Thorpe has talked about, is, we've been talking about this project for a long period of time to the public, and I just think going back out and saying, oh, now we're going to pick another project, but it's actually double, is a dangerous move. And that really does concern me. I think I agree with Councillor Gesselbrook. Honest to God, we need it now. But I think it's really tough on the community to understand how you went from one. You had 2 AAPs. They both failed for different reasons. Now you're coming back and asking for a double the amount, even though we know at this table that it actually makes better sense. But I worry about how that perception is to the general public, and so I'm still going to vote for option 1. If it fails, I'm not sure what I'll do at that point. But I just think for us to get through option 1 with an AAP is just so important at this stage. I'd rather face the music down the road about the administration building. And I think it's unfortunate, because I think we should have done it option 3 to begin with, but you know what? Hindsight's 20/20.
Councillor Hilary Eastmuir said that if the plan to pursue more comprehensive upgrades to the public works yard all at once makes more sense, council should support it.
I feel like Councillor Perino just said it. You said option 3 makes better sense, and we know that around this table, so that's the answer. We need to show the leadership now so that we're not pushing off the pain to a future council, which we may or may not be a part of, to deal with the administration building at that time, and you're asking for another AAP for more borrowing. Instead of just communicating fully to the public now, this is going to be the ultimate cost of this project, to get all the pieces done, and we're never going to ask you about it again, and we're just going to get the project done knowing we have the urgent pieces that are required. And I just don't want to advance on this project without having the administration part as nailed down on this. And I constantly hear about Nanaimo's that we kind of do half a project and then the second half falls away, and we never finish anything. I would love to just get this done. And I think we can all do a good job of communicating to the public, and we all heard the same concerns that the phased project, people didn't understand it, and they really didn't like the uncertainty, and with cost escalations being what they are, being able to save $10 million by doing option 3 makes a lot of sense to me. So I really hope that we can support option 3 on this.
Ultimately, the committee voted to support option 3, with councillors Manley, Hemmons, Gesselbrecht, and Eastmuir voting in favour. Councillors Thorpe, Perino, and Mayor Krog voted against. Councillors Cheryl Armstrong and Tyler Brown were not present at the vote. The issue will be back before council at a July 8th meeting. When we come back, we'll debrief the debate with Nanaimo Mayor Leonard Krog.
Midcoast Morning is made possible by the Community Radio Fund of Canada's Radio Meters program and listeners like you. Support Midcoast Morning and CHLY's nonprofit newsroom today by becoming a sustaining donor at chly.ca/donate. Local news can't survive without your support. Another way to help us out is to share this show with your friends and tell them why they should support us. Finally, if you're listening to the podcast edition of Midcoast Morning, go and give us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast feed you use. It helps people find us.
City Council is considering changing the plan for upgrades to its public works yard and administration building at Labiou Road. The upgrades have been in the works for years and have also been called the Nanaimo Operations Center project. If you're just joining us, we've been bringing you details from a Monday Governance and Priorities Committee meeting on the future of the project. Council was split between two options. The first is essentially the same proposal the city had put to voters in two cancelled AAP processes. It would involve borrowing up to $48 million to build a new fleet maintenance facility for the city to service its vehicles like fire trucks. A majority of councillors at the meeting ultimately supported a different plan called Option 3. In that option, the city would still build the fleet maintenance facility. They would also construct a new administration building for staff at the same time. The option projected up to $90 million of borrowing. Staff said that in the long run, that option would ultimately cost less than it would to upgrade the fleet maintenance facility now and then upgrade the administration building later. For more on the meeting and where the idea goes from here, I spoke with Nanaimo Mayor Leonard Krog. There was a very close vote at this meeting. There were two councillors not present. What do you see as the potential for the situation to evolve between now and when a more final decision is made on this?
Well, obviously, as a decision of the Governance and Priorities Committee, it has to be put in front of the full council meeting at a regular council meeting. And at that point, we'll have Councillor Brown, who was there for most of the debate, but we somehow lost him or he wasn't available, and Councillor Armstrong, who wasn't available at all. They will have a chance to express themselves and vote on the matter again. I personally voted against what I'll call the larger option because I think that staff gave us the right recommendation. The indication was it was still the right recommendation. And although you can certainly argue it saves money potentially in the long run, it's also a bigger tax hit in the short run. And I think the community was acquainted with and had become acquainted with the proposal, what we'll call the $48.5 million borrowing option. And I'm still prepared to support that. But you know what? I am one of those people who's prepared to listen to what other councillors have to say, and there may be a different decision coming at council when we get there. And plus, we're obviously going to hear some more from staff.
How much does the prospect of having to go through another AAP, or I guess potentially a referendum on this issue, like if you didn't have to do that and you could just borrow the funds, would your opinion on which of the kind of options to take change?
I don't like to speculate. No politician does, but I'm inclined to think I wouldn't change because of what I had to say, which is still in the back of my mind. We have a number of significant capital projects that are being discussed and have been discussed for several years in the city, whether it's a waterfront walkway, a recreation center in the south end equivalent to Oliver Wood, which has been long talked about and much merited, certainly by the citizens who are already there and the incredible number of people who are moving into the south end as well. So there's a number of other ways that we are going to need or want to, or on behalf of the citizens, spend money. And so borrowing a larger amount for this particular project and not doing it in quite the same number of phases means that there will be less room for capital borrowing. So that's a consideration for me still.
Now, the big thing that would be added if council goes for this kind of larger borrowing option is a new admin building for staff. During the meeting, Councillor Gesselbrecht raised that he's heard from several people who used to work for the city that the reason they stopped, the reason that they left, is because of the built environment, the current building they have, which is sort of a a Frankenstein mash of trailers glued together. If that doesn't get approved, wrapped into this process now, what would be the timeline on replacing it?
There's no fixed and firm timeline on that, and staff made it very clear. The reality is the administrative building is rubbish. So are the other buildings on the property. The whole place, frankly, given we're living in a 21st century modern growing city, it's rubbish, and it needs to be replaced. But I think we acquainted the citizens, and staff asked for and council supported doing it in a certain series of phases. As I say, I mean, I don't like to speculate, but what will be decided over the longer haul, hard to say. But certainly I see the administration offices as incredibly important. I go out there, not every week by any stretch, but I get out there often enough. I know the conditions that people are working in and how frustrating it is. And Councillor Gesselbrock, I'm sure he has spoken to some people who've indicated they didn't want to stay working there. But on the other hand, I must compliment the staff that we do have. They do amazing work in challenging places where many of the citizens of this community, if they actually toured the offices, would probably say, oh my goodness, I wouldn't work here.
Now, this project has been delayed a few times because of the canceled AAP processes. Does that factor into a decision to maybe now, given that, you know, if this had gone through originally, maybe we'd almost be at the point where we'd be on phase 2 of this? Does that factor into the potential to maybe change things, change the plan? Interesting question. I mean, from my perspective, I'm certainly prepared, unless I'm persuaded otherwise, to proceed with another AAP. I think this is exactly the kind of project for which the alternate approval process was designed. This is a need to, not a nice to have. This is a need to have. And having said that, when council makes that decision based on the evidence and information we receive, input from the community, from our staff, from advisors, from professionals, then it behooves us to get it done. And it behooves us to say to the community, which we do by putting it out for an alternate approval process, this is important. We think it's important enough that we're going to let you have a say, so to speak, as the legislation has allowed for decades. But ultimately, we're saying we believe it's the right thing to do. We're hoping you'll support it by not opposing it. Now, the purpose of the Governance and Priorities Committee meeting is ostensibly on this and other issues to provide councillors a chance to go into maybe more fulsome discussion than they would at just a regular council meeting, to learn new information. Given that, what new facts do you maybe take away from this session?
Look, the option 3, so-called option 3, the potential of doing the 2 buildings early on, a much more significant boring to start with. I must say, I find it very intriguing, but I was conscious of the fact yesterday, as I said during debate, that this is coming back to a full council with the 2 other council members present, and I'm looking forward to what they have to say as well. Councillor Brown, as I say, we didn't get to hear everything that I wanted to hear from him, and Councillor Armstrong, because it wasn't available at all, and I'll be interested to hear what they have to say. I try very hard to listen to what other council members have to say during debate, and we will have that opportunity again. There will be further information from staff. So, you know, taking what for people who've been in British Columbia will recall W.A.C. Bennett, Premier W.A.C. Bennett's famous phrase, Wacky's famous second look. Never hurts to have a second look. If staff had recommended option 3 at the beginning of the process, way back when, for, you know, as opposed to the staged process, I think given what had gone on with previous councils, staff probably felt that that was an impossible hill to climb. But if that had been the suggestion from the start, I might well have supported it right from the start. Right now, I'm being more tentative because at the same time, we have all these other capital projects that are needed. I'd want to see some pretty tight figures, as will the public generally. And there's also the question potentially of a referendum. And as I said to council, look, if we take this to an alternate approval process, the bigger number, option 3, and it fails, we have staked a fair bit of political credibility and capital on this as a council by saying we think this is worthy of an AAP process as opposed to going to a full and what is an expensive referendum. That means we think it's appropriate that this be done. If that's the case and it failed in an alternate approval process again, then we have no other option other than to go to a full referendum, which is expensive and may well prove more divisive than is necessary in a community that otherwise might have been most people might have been quite happy to see this just go ahead. We know that with the viciousness of social media, which has changed the political landscape significantly in my time, I can tell you, the kind of rumors and gossip and garbage that is spread around and believed and repeated is quite disturbing. And so these kinds of campaigns are often quite challenging. Now, having said all that, let's not forget the basic facts of the alternate approval processes, one of which we were told was quote unquote not in compliance. Turned out it probably was. And the second one, which in mistake was incurred, that's been fully covered in a public, transparent, open report by Ms. Warren. In both cases, nothing near the number was reached that would have meant that the project was turned down. I mean, we're talking a few thousand votes, not the 10% required by the legislation. What that tells me, and what I draw from it, is quite simply this: even though the second process ended somewhat early, it was clear to me that it was a small group, relatively speaking, of citizens who were opposed to the boring. And whereas the majority of citizens, by their refusal to participate in the alternate approval process, were saying, we're okay with the decision. You need to remember that.
It's not necessarily that this is a particularly complicated issue, but it maybe takes a few minutes of time to explain to someone to get them up to speed. What would you like to, and a big part of this as an issue maybe centers on letting the public know that it's happening in the first place, providing them the details of it. What would you like the public to know about this process right now before I let you go?
In terms of the alternate approval process for the public works yard, what I want them to know is this. This is basic infrastructure. We need new shops. The buildings are not earthquake proof. They are terrible places for our workers to do the kind of servicing for the vast array of equipment that the city must have in order to meet the challenges of maintaining our roads, our water, our sewers, delivering, picking up garbage, recycling, etc. It's a basic. The administration offices are, as I said, they're rubbish. They're not places where people should be working. In some respects, I'm quite how shall I say, touched by the devotion of our staff to continue to work in those places. Although, as you point out, Councillor Gesselbrock indicated some folks have said, no, they're not prepared to do it anymore. So the process is simply this. Council has decided this is necessary for our city. The alternate approval process is an opportunity for citizens to say, we don't think you're right on this. We disapprove. You can't do this. If you want the money to do this, if you want to borrow the money, then you have to go to a full-blown referendum, regardless of the fact it costs a lot of money. It's just like running an election, etc. What I am hopeful in this, whatever process is pursued, and the final decision is not made, let's be clear. Whatever process is pursued, it behooves us as a city to do a better job of doing exactly what you're trying to give me the opportunity to do now, and that is explain it better, make it clearer, make it simpler so that people understand exactly what's being proposed. I mean, a lot of people are saying, oh, 48 million for this, it's ridiculous, without even understanding that the basic cost, I think, was 26 million, and we allowed for significant inflation, contingencies, etc. That was the maximum borrowing. It wasn't necessarily what would be borrowed or what indeed would be spent on the project. But we were trying to give what I will call the most dramatic worst case scenario. That became a figure that got fixed in people's minds. I think we got to do a better job next time of explaining exactly what it is we're asking the citizens to support by way of, if you will, not participating in an alternate approval process if we go that way, or alternatively, if it's a referendum, by getting out and voting to support it.
Whatever happens, I'm sure we'll have the chance to talk about it again. Mayor Krog, thank you very much, as always, for taking the time.
A pleasure. Appreciate the interest and the opportunity to hopefully not muddy the waters for people.
Nanaimo Mayor Leonard Krog speaking with me about the future of the Nanaimo Operations Centre project, which looks to upgrade the public works yard on Labiou Road. That's our show for the day. Thank you for joining me. I'm Joe Pugh, host and producer of Midcoast Morning. Jesse Woodward is our executive producer, and Arby Frew is our technical advisor. You can sign up for CHLY's newsletter at chly.ca/subscribe for updates from our nonprofit newsroom. Our theme song is First One by local Nanaimo band Waste Management. If you have a story you'd like us to cover, email us at news@chly.ca. That's all for now. I'll talk to you on another Midcoast Morning.
Midcoast Morning would not be possible without the funding of the Community Radio Fund of Canada's Radio Meters program and listeners like you. Midcoast Morning is a project of CHLY's nonprofit newsroom. Support nonprofit journalism in Nanaimo and on the Salish Sea today by becoming a monthly sustaining donor at $5 or more per month. Support the program at chly.ca/donate. If you're already a supporter, record a voice memo telling others where you're listening from and why they too should support our work. After you're done, you can email it to us. Also, share the podcast with your friends. While Meta is blocking Canadian users from sharing news content on their Facebook feeds, you can still share our podcast directly with your friends via Facebook or Instagram Messenger. Finally, this program acknowledges and gives thanks to the Snuneymuxw First Nation as we broadcast and podcast from their traditional territory. Thanks for listening.